This week, Will Lin from AKA Identity is with us to discuss the future of identity. Then, in the enterprise security news, AI security funding hasn't slowed. Four of our seven fundings that we'll talk about today are securing AI, and the rest are trying to use AI to secure IT. Cloudflare acquires Bastion Zero, BugCrowd acquires Informer. Synopsys divests its AppSec portfolio. We've got some interesting new companies to talk about, some new products, and tons of new features. Many of these features, wait for it, are powered by AI. So another episode full of AI. Sorry about that. That's just where things are going. The increasing push for defenders to fully automate remediation, which is one of the most interesting things I think came out of RSA this year. We'll also cover a few hot takes, some interesting how to's, some new enterprise trends, and two squirrel stories that both revolve around solving the puzzle of strange audio signals. Finally, we've got three more pre recorded interviews for you from last month's RSA. For our first interview, I interview Jim Broom, president and CTO at Direct Defense, about how hard healthcare has been getting hit by attacks over the past year. Then Mandy Logan interviews Christopher Harrell, CTO at Yubico, about the urgency of eliminating passwords. And finally, Jeff Mann interviews John Shire, field CTO of Threat Intelligence at Sophos, about the company's fifth annual State of Ransomware 2024 report. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Graylog elevates enterprise-level cybersecurity through its comprehensive SIEM, centralized log management, and API security solutions. Built on the Graylog platform, Graylog Security combines SIEM, security analytics, threat detection, and incident response capabilities. Unlike traditional SIEMs, which offer complex and costly setups, Graylog Security simplifies security and operational challenges with an optimal blend of licensing, people, and infrastructure costs. To see a demo, visit securityweekly.com/Graylog. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Drive-In Movie Day. This is episode 364, recorded on Thursday, July 6th. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Admiral of AppSec Posture Management, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How you doing, Katie?
I am well. Thank you for updating my bio as of about a week ago.
Yeah, I felt it, with a new job, felt it appropriate to adjust your intro a little bit to suit that.
Well, it's spring. Everything's new, so it's all good.
All right. Also joining us, the Prince of Product, the Knight of Newsletters, Darwin Salazar. How are you, Darwin?
Howdy do. Can't complain. Life is pretty good and excited to be here with this All-Stars cast coming off the heels of Identiverse. So lots to dig into and excited to be speaking with our guest.
I think there's one drive-in movie theater near me. I thought that was an interesting day to have. I'm not sure how many of those are still out there. I've never actually been to one, but I know of one that I could drive to. It's about a probably 40-50 minute drive for me up towards the Smokies, towards Townsend, Tennessee, if anybody's familiar with East Tennessee.
Would it surprise you if I told you that I haven't been to a drive-in movie theater?
Ever?
No, I haven't.
Ever.
Yeah, I haven't ever.
Really?
I have. Oh, you haven't either?
No.
See,
never.
Darwin, that
Now,
doesn't
I know of where one
me,
is, but I've never been.
Adrian, yeah. Not
I
when
mean,
I
it's
was
not
a
that I
little.
haven't had opportunity. It's just not been convenient, I guess.
Okay.
Well,
When I
I
was a
think
kid,
we have
we
some
used to
things
go.
to.
Could be a goal for this summer. I don't know. Like if on a day that's not too hot.
It's interesting just to try out, see how the whole setup works. It's unique. It's different.
So I think it's interesting. We could push for a comeback of drive-in movie theaters now that electric cars are a thing, and you don't have to idle you don't have to have 200 cars idling their engines, burning gas and pumping fumes out. you can just sit there silently and be nicely air conditioned with your electric car. That would be pretty cool.
Well, back
Yeah, and
in
I
the
Makes
think
it
this is
sound more
Stone
bringing.
attractive
Age,
to
you
me, at
just
least.
turned off your car and sweat through a movie.
And
Yeah,
people
and
are
I
not going to do that. Right. Like,
no.
and this is East
Probably not.
Tennessee. Like, they removed the catalytic converter, like they're going to be sitting there just pumping out, smokestacks, just pumping out smoke right next to you. Yeah. It's just not going to happen.
And I also think folks just have PTSD from having to sit through driving movies during the pandemic. So, not sure that driving movie theater culture is coming back to life anytime soon, but hopefully, National Day of Driving Movie Theater will raise awareness and bring some box office sales to these theaters, which are probably not generating that much revenue these days. But
Yeah. I mean,
So here's
it
an
could be
idea.
really interesting, right? Like, you don't have to hear the person next to you talking. And I think you tune in your car's stereo, like use an FM station to do it. So if you have a really nice sound system in your car, like that's starting to sound pretty attractive. Like, I don't have to smell the person next to me. They can't spill their drink on me. And like, I can actually, well, it's usually movie theaters have pretty good sound. So improving the sound is not a big problem, but still
They're really
privacy is
loud
a,
these days. Yeah. If you go
yeah.
to an actual movie, it is so
Yeah.
overwhelmingly loud that you can't
There you
hear
go. You can set the
people.
volume where you want it.
No.
Yeah. This is sounding better and better the more we talk about it, but we should get to the interview here.
We could talk about movie theaters
Digress
and
too much.
all of their advancements or not, but let's
Yes.
talk to Will. That's why he's here.
Yeah. So first announcement here, dive into cybersecurity with Cyber Risk Alliance for exclusive insights from RSA Conference 2024. As I mentioned, we have some of those videos at the end of today's episode. Explore executive interviews with industry leaders, uncovering visionary perspectives on threats and strategies. Delve into curated articles on trends and innovations, equipping yourself with essential knowledge for today's cyber landscape. Visit securityweekly.com/RSAC for expert guidance and inspiration in navigating cybersecurity challenges confidently. And that brings us to today's interview. Today's topic is identity security and the future of identity. We're excited to have Will Lin, founder and CEO of AKA Identity, with us today. When we last had Will Lin on the show, he was in the VC world as the managing director of ForgePoint Capital, but he left to become a founder of his own cybersecurity startup. Welcome, Will.
Hello. Thank you very much.
And first off, I'm kind of curious, going straight to founding a startup from being a VC, does that make raising capital easier? Like, the people, I suppose the do's and don'ts of, pitching to raise capital. Is it, do you think you have an advantage there?
So it's hard to calibrate easier just because I haven't done it. Like it's like the whole, I can't be in multiple dimensions at once in a world where I've never had the VC experience to be able to compare against, for example. Uh, but I will say that I feel like I did have some unfair advantages just from knowing what I knew versus being completely unaware of the different dynamics of what could happen during a fundraise if I were a first-time entrepreneur. Um, and because there are just a lot of these micro decisions that you have to make in everything, including fundraising, and just being able to make those micro decisions with confidence, I think just saves a lot of time and mental anguish. Just knowing that you're probably doing the right thing. You're not going to be perfect, but you're probably moving
Mhm.
down the right direction is really nice.
Yeah, so at least you're not going to make newbie mistakes, and you're not going to second guess yourself as much as you might if you weren't familiar with the process.
Yeah, exactly. And with the relationships, people were very curious and they wanted to hear about the story and what was good enough to like give up a whole career in venture capital, right? Kind
Mhm.
of such situation. And happy to say a year later from the making the transition since partnering up with Rob, my co-founder, very, very happy with the decision.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and jump to Identiverse. You recently attended CRA's Identiverse conference, in Vegas, and you also attended last year, and that was before you launched, before you publicly launched the company, right? So it was kind
Yes.
of I imagine like a gathering, information gathering
It was like
mission.
a tester, like, hey, is this really the place to go and dedicate the next 10 plus years of my life kind of situation? Yeah.
Right. So what was so since you were at last year's and this year's, was there a noticeable difference in conversation there, in discussions going on, what people were interested in?
It was much larger this year than last year. So the expo floor actually doubled this year versus last year as well. And in talking to some of the organizers, in some sort of key personas that they were tracking, they've actually had 50% increase versus last year. Um, the the difference in conversation, I though I thought was super interesting. Last year, every conversation was around how does AI impact identity? Like everyone is trying to knowledge share what could happen, will happen, should happen now that AI is sort of at this big conversational point. And people were looking for inspiration then. This year, yes, of course, there was AI sprinkled throughout conversations, but it wasn't the number one like theme. Like it wasn't like, oh, I'm sorry to be talking about AI yet again kind of theme at Identiverse. It was something else entirely. In fact, AI was probably not even in the top 10 sort of like repeated keywords of Identiverse, which to me was a
Oh
really
wow.
big surprise, considering I had just come from RSA a couple of weeks earlier, where AI continued to be the theme and the conversational topic and keyword for every single conversation and booth and vendor and XYZ thing as well. Um, I'm still wrapping my head around it. Why? Like, why did it not come up as much in Identiverse?
Yeah, maybe that category is just moving at a different speed from everything else. Because with AI, at least in the conversations I have, maybe this is just anecdotal, but most of it was revolving around security operations. I feel like so maybe it's hitting different categories at different points. Is just a guess.
I think that's very possible. It is fun to see that like the initial use cases that we're dreaming up around AI, and sort of like which pain points we're targeting with it as well. In identity, it's it does feel like there is a continuous sort of focus on back to the basics in that industry. Um, and so a lot of the top 10 conversations I felt like I saw this year were very tied to existing problems, existing solutions, and sort of how do we do it better, faster, cheaper kind of situation.
Right. Right.
Nice. And what were some of those, say, like the top three trends that you noticed through your through your conversations, and then also sitting through talks and speaking with other founders and prospects and customers?
Yeah, yeah. I think the most exciting and new, but better, faster, cheaper, and maybe for me it comes across as better, faster, cheaper because I'm also deep in the security industry as well. But the most exciting new theme was around identity security. Um, Previously folks thought about identity security differently than they do today. Today, there is much more interest in sort of understanding the latest, greatest breaches and attacks from the identity perspective, and then what can they do to start preventing them and protecting against them. And so, like concepts of like blast radius and sort of phishing and all those key themes weren't as prevalent before, but became very prevalent this year within sort of the identity community. The second theme that I saw come up more clearly was around orchestration, or it's like the concept of orchestration as a whole. And the question is, what are you orchestrating? Are you orchestrating the plumbing? So the different systems? Are you orchestrating people? Are you orchestrating data? orchestrating the remediations kind of situation as well. And overall, I saw a much greater interest in trying to sort of take this puzzle piece and get it to the next level. And then as a complement to both the orchestration theme as well as the security theme, I saw a greater focus around data as well. So data visibility, analytics capabilities. So how can you bring all these different disparate pieces of data together where it's not yet in a visualized, understandable form or in a normalized form as well, and start being able to actually understand who is doing what, why are they doing it, how do they get access to it, and should they continue to have access to it as well.
Awesome. So it sounds like orchestration has been a big theme, not only in identity security, but we're also noticing it within vulnerability management, network security, cloud security, and a bunch of different verticals, especially also with with the rise of ASPM, where you're trying to orchestrate across many different point solutions to get as much visibility and contextualization. And then also there's a heavy focus on all of the data that these different identity solutions generate. And then you mentioned that there's been a shift in how we define identity security and how it's matured over time, especially compared to last year. How would you define identity security today, and how does that compare to identity governance?
Yeah. So identity security, I do think it's a huge opportunity to define. The furthest we've gotten in previous years has been stuff like ITDR, for example. And I think it's oversimplifying to call ITDR the superhuman impossible traveler use case, but that tends to be one of the common wins in the ITDR space as well. And overall, the industry is starting to recognize that ITDRs is a pretty small set of features and not really a platform or set as big of a category as it might seem as well. And so as a result, there's a big white space in terms of what identity security should be. What is that repeatable win that everyone will be able to get to that we haven't gotten to today? I think right now, to me, the lowest hanging fruit that every single organization has is the opportunity to clean up over provisioned access. Everyone knows they have the problem. And everyone knows that, in fact, the people who really know that they have the problem are afraid to actually know what the problem is because they're going to get blown up by all the work that they need to do to clean it up as well.
They
And
don't want to open
so
that box.
they don't open that box, right? That can of worms. And so, but the fact that we all know that exists, the fact that we know those can of worms, I think is a gigantic opportunity for the identity security world to go after.
Are you seeing, because it used to be, going back a little bit, identity was one team, security was another. Then identity started to come into the security realm, but it was still the identity team maybe working hand in hand. Then some identity teams fell under security. Where are you seeing identity fall these days?
Yeah. We are gradually seeing more momentum in seeing identity report under security. And there's multiple reasons for it. One of them is we're also seeing instances where there's more security leaders also owning IT, for example, as well. The more regulated the industry, the more often security is reporting under identity is reporting under security as well. For a little time in the past, and still is in some ways, identity was one of those things that no one really knew who owned, or no one really wanted to raise their hand and say they owned it. Like, security is fun, and you get to talk about breaches and attacks. Like, someone would want to raise their hand and do that, right? Even though it's painful and it's hard, it was something that you could raise your hand for. You don't watch. There's no movies about identity management, right? Like there's nothing interesting, and there's no old school hackers movie for
Well, there
the
is. There's
identity
one.
ecosystem.
There's one movie with Sandra Bullock. There's one.
Is it the
Okay.
net?
What's the name of it?
Is it the net?
It's the one with Sandra Bullock. I don't remember.
That's the net, right? Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
the
Yeah.
net. Yeah, I haven't seen it,
Did
but I know of it.
Now I need to go watch it. Like I have no
Yeah.
choice being in the identity ecosystem to watch
You
that
know,
movie
you
now,
know the
right?
one movie, but anyway, to your point.
That one movie, right? Like
There we
it
go.
was just something that no one specifically, purposely raised their hand up to own. And now that identity has become more or less the de facto trust perimeter for every organization, now more and more CISOs are raising their hand and say, "Hey, I will own this," because I sort of have to.
And Will, you had previously alluded to the fact that ITDR last year was seen as there was a lot of buzz around it as its own product category, but as time has passed, it's become more evident that it's just a set of capabilities or features that should fit into a broader identity security solution. I think that there's been an emergence in non-human identities and investments going into that area over the past 6 months. I kind of see them see NHIs and the non-human identity security issue similar to ITDR capabilities. I was very interested in hearing from your perspective as an identity security founder, and then also having just come back from Identiverse. How are you thinking about non-human identities?
Yeah, yeah. So I have two trains of thought. And my primary train of thought is that it is a rebranding of an existing category of machine identities. So service accounts, credential management, that kind of situation. Is it an important category? Is it a necessary category? It is, yes. And I think when we look at Venafi getting acquired by CyberArk as well, I think there's a lot of good lessons learned there in terms of what could be the future of non-human identity. What I'd say is that Venafi and just the whole machine identity category as a whole didn't grow that quickly. It was a nice size category, but it wasn't one where it was like growing 30, 20% per year. And so it just required companies to expand their aperture in order to increase their TAM, in order to increase the size of their business kind of situation as well. And so, what I see the whole non-human identity category trying to do, and what they have to do, is essentially increase the TAM of the machine identity category in order for them to all be sustainable and successful. And as of now, I don't think there's a widely defined definition of what that increased TAM is, or will be, or needs to be. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing all these new companies defining that over time and showing us the vision that they had when they wanted to create this category. And so the second train of thought is referring to what has not been solved by machine identity solutions in the past that needs to be solved now and could become a large category. And that for me is where I still have a lot more data and I have a lot more to learn. It didn't pop up very often in my hundreds of identity research conversations. Like the closest it was, and it could, maybe this is the direction they do go, is hey, I need to also manage my cloud identities. My cloud identities are growing incredibly as well. But there was another category that was created specifically for cloud identities called CIEM, Cloud Identities, Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management, CIEM. So perhaps non-human identities ends up becoming a combination of CIEM and machine identities. It just, there's such a definitional like quagmire and lots of people doing their different things, and so it's to me that's what I see that all that buzz looking like today, using both my VC hat and my identity hat.
So I think this is a good opportunity to segue. You're talking about how do we grow the TAM for machine identities, um, but for any new category, I think there's just a couple ways that we see the TAM grow. One of those is industry analysts start talking about it, and the other one is the White House CISA standards. So something comes out that says you now have to do this, or you should be focused on this. So what do you see happening there, particularly with identity security? What's
Yeah.
pushing it, right?
I think the nice thing is that we've had this underlying zero trust theme that's been building and for quite a long time now, and so that I think is going to be a contributor to this identity security theme as well. So, for instance, we talked about sort of identity. One huge opportunity in identity security is dealing with over provisioning. That's essentially another way of saying zero trust, right?
Yeah.
And that's essentially one of the reasons why zero trust is so exciting. Is like, oh, we all know we have over provisioning. We need to start working towards zero trust, right? The issue with the word zero trust is that we're referring to the end state, which is like impossible, more or less,
Yeah.
and not referring to the journey of getting there. And so over provisioning is a nice way of talking about the journey of getting there as well. And the nice thing is that the zero trust acronym and idea and theme has been worked on and thought about and defined and it's beginning to be more clearly defined by both CISA and as well as the industry analysts as well. So I think there is a bright future ahead around what's possible, both in terms of practitioners gaining the conviction and excitement to do these kinds of projects, vendors in terms of enabling these kinds of projects, as well as industry sort of drivers sort of helping lead the way and pave the path for them as well.
And I think it's a really good point. I remember watching the original Google Beyond Core presentations, and the first thing that they really highlight is we had to spend a couple of years just figuring out privileges and identities and what people should have access to, and creating these roles and locking this. Like they talked about that as the real friction point, the real hard part of the journey was just figuring out what people should have access to in the first place. And it's still very much, I think, an unsolved problem at this point, which you talk about in terms of the kind of data being separate, not having all the data in one place for everything. So there's a big data challenge there as well. A lot of different organizations, IT groups, and tools own different pieces of identity, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Google couldn't have gotten to the progress that they made and so quickly if they didn't have support from all the way from the top down
Yeah.
around that problem. And so doing that the data crunching, the getting multiple people on board, the making the decisions around both, in micro decisions as well as policy decisions on who should have access to what kind of situation. Like there was so much there that turned turned their ability to be able to deploy that beyond corp model. And the world hasn't had that, top down focus but it's had that interest. And so we're step by step moving our way there to be able to replicate the Beyond Corp model across other organizations as well.
We've really been talking about zero trust for a very long time, and it's all, of course, predicated on the idea of access, which is predicated on the idea of identity, and of course, identity meaning a lot of different things. And you talked at the beginning of this interview about the difference between IGA and identity security, but they have to fit together in some way. So how do you said you've had hundreds of interviews, right? So how do you see that evolving? Because if you don't have any governance model, right, you can't do identity security. We're starting to realize as an industry that integrations they have to happen. It's not just the integrations, but it's aggregation, it's the normalization to give you that concerted view. And it's almost table stakes at this point. But how does identity handle that? How does identity help with that? Hinder it? How does it fit in?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the way that identity is today is that there are, first of all, already three key pillars to identity, right? The IGAs, the privilege access solutions, and the access management solutions, including directories, for example. And those three have three different ways of describing identity security and what should identity look like within an organization. And there's already opportunity there just bringing those three together and better orchestrating those three as well. But what's happening at the same time is the industry is also creating all these new categories, right? We already talked about cloud entitlements and identities, so that's one more. We are, creating SaaS entitlements and identities. We're talking about non-human entitlements and identities, where we have contractors, we have interns. There's just so many things that we keep creating, be on top of the sort of core three pillars of identity that already exist. And so what's happening is just lots of people yelling, and the only way to sort of bring it all together today is to hire like an architect of each, and then basically have the architects talk to each other within the company and to try to figure out how to merge many of these multiple programs together so that they work together more holistically. Um, Coming from the VC perspective, to me, I thought the answer to this was very obvious, because anytime there's a dispute or a decision, data is always the easiest way to just level set the entire conversation, right? Like, you can't argue against data. Like, if it's the right data, doing the right analytics to answer the right question, that kind of situation, it's pretty hard to, yes, you can do all kinds of fun things to try to manipulate the answer in the data side. But when you know all those different components, it's much, much easier to be able to speak the language of business, which is data. And so when I looked at this sort of industry, I just thought, you know what? Why don't we orchestrate the data? And in fact, when we look at the progression of identity over time, and in fact, my co-presenter at Identiverse was McKinsey, where he talked about the progression of identity over time. What he noticed as well was that every sort of generational spark comes from some kind of meta layer being created. So one meta layer was the directories. Like, instead of all these different applications with each of their own directories, let's do a unified directory kind of situation.
Mhm.
And then the next layer was, okay, what if we had connectors to start bringing all these applications together situation as well. What we're seeing, especially in this future, more intelligent world that depends on data, well, let's build this data meta layer to bring all these different voices together as well.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and it's so I guess before we wrap up, Will, just talking about the future, so that kind of brings us up to the present, right? So where, what are you kind of depending on? Which meta layer is coming next, and is that something we need to be successful here to bring all this stuff together? Is it just a merging of the different layers? Like what is the future here?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm happy to say that Identiverse started seeing people use this phrase more, and which is identity data engineering. Um, and this is referring to creating that next meta layer for identity. So creating that data layer for identity as well. Um, and um, and what we all want, of course, is to this AI layer for everything. But we all also know that in order to do anything AI, we need to have good data as well.
Yeah.
And so this future generation of like AI native applications, they're all going to be built off of good data, or at least some kind of unified normalized data that just doesn't exist today as well. And so I think we're in the preparation stages for a world where there is more automated identity and access management, because first we have the data to be able to have decent visibility into what's actually going on in an identity program.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out.
That's right. Exactly.
What? Will, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. This was, I learned a lot in this episode, actually. This is great.
It was my pleasure. It's great to see you, everyone.
Stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to cover this week's news.